this session, we are going to look at the record level security access using role and OWD settings. So this is the second part. The earlier part we saw how to restrict access to objects, apps, tabs and layout using profiles. But in this session, now we're going to look at the record level security. So if you remember, this part we just completed where how to use profiles. And then records is what will be controlled. Now you can assume that the user has got read or write records to a delete object update, but then we have to see how the record level access is controlled. It's controlled using three entities: OWD, which is called organization wide defaults, and then role hierarchy, and then we have something called as sharing. If you look at the security settings in Salesforce, we have organization, then in addition to that we also have some additional settings which is called security organization access, which can restrict the IP ranges and login hours from which a user can log in. Object level access, which we already seen. Field level is using field level access, and then we look at the record level. So let us look at this particular object here. So this is again the account object. So now we know using profile the user can have a CRUD access to that object. But now look at these records. Now this is what will be controlled by role hierarchy and OWD settings. So organization wide defaults is where what we use to control. This determines what is the access users have to records that they don't own. Who's the owner of a record? Anybody who creates a record or is assigned an owner to a record as a record owner is the owner of the record. So you cannot grant access to users more access than they have through their object permission. For most objects, OWD settings are public read write, public transfer, public read only, and private. OWD is a basic record level. What is organization wide default? It's a basic record level security for users. OWD decides the user what kind of access user has on records. By default, the owner of the record will have access based on the object level security. Other users will have access based on OWD. So a few objects like lead and case have public read write transfer, right? So that is some extra settings. Now grant access using hierarchy is a setting which allows the record owner managers based on role hierarchy to see the particular record of their subordinates. Another concept that you need to remember is in master detail relationship, which we saw last time. For example, between student marks and master and student master, detail object inherit the security model of the master. This is not the case in the case of lookup. So there is no automatic OWD record level access sharing. So some of the basic OWD settings is public read write. If an object has public read write, that means all users in the organization can access the record and read and write. If it is public read only, then only read only access is allowed. If it is private, then your sharing rules and your role hierarchy. If the OWD is set to private, only peers, only owner of the record can see the record, or anybody in his hierarchy can see the record, that is his manager. Okay, then there is a grant access using hierarchies and controlled by parent, which we spoke about, that the child records, the child objects OWD is controlled by the parent's record settings. Then you have something called as grant access using hierarchies. When you say grant access using hierarchies, the manager of a record can see the subordinate's record when the OWD is set to private. Now if you're using this OWD private settings and sharing, it needs to work with role hierarchy. Now this is a typical role hierarchy. It's a typical organization hierarchy. You'll have a manager in your company, CFO, CEO, sales manager, extends across. So role hierarchy extends access to records, but it cannot restrict records. Every user needs to be assigned to a role, generally in a organization. So two things which you have to do for a user which are very important are, first is which one? The profile. What does profile control? Object level. And then the second one is the role. Where you are in the role affects your visibility of records. Like say this is the manager and here these are peers. So if organization wide defaults is set to private, peers cannot see each other's record unless it is shared. Only managers can see the record using sharing using hierarchies by default. So now this is a typical role hierarchy. At CEO is at the top, BP, Europe, North America. So If regional manager creates a record and setting is set to OWD is private, only he can see the record or his managers can see. If you have to give access to the peers, you have to create a sharing rule as an admin. So using sharing, you can extend access beyond. So share records owned by a role, group, or with. So records can be owned by a group of users or a role also. So it is applied in real time when a record is created or ownership is transferred. A user with owner-like access to record can share it with other users. Who can share? Owner of the record. Either the manager or administrator who has got owner-like access. That is view all modifier. In the case of manual account sharing, access to child and case can be granted to. So you can create criteria based sharing rules. If you want to provide access to users who do not get it because of the role hierarchy, sharing rules only at top of OWD, and it is not possible to remove access by which is already shared. So if you already given a OWD a public read right, you cannot make it read only. So sharing can be based on criteria or based on some other values. So can create up to 50 sharing rules per object. So that's the data limit. So these are the criterias you can use. These are the data type of fields. So if there are multiple sharing rules, important point is users will get the most allowed permissive access. So and also one important thing is sharing rules are stored in share objects of each and every custom or standard object. So there is a calculation done. If there are lakhs or millions of records, you need to be very careful, as it may cause a performance issue. So you need to plan for a downtime when you do recalculate sharing rules. How does a user own a record in Salesforce? Either he has created, either you have view all, modify all, then you'll always have. That's why you should never enable it excepting for the administrator profile. By virtue of his role, if he's a manager or something, owner of a record. If you create a record or you're inherited by transfer a record, record is transferred to your ownership, you're the owner of the record. And the rest of the things is either done by sharing rules, manual sharing, or even by programmatic sharing or OWD settings. Because in addition to this, we'll also take a look at what is organization access. You can restrict the IP ranges. You can restrict the login hours. You can also freeze user accounts. So these are some ways in which you can control access to the org. So now we'll see the sharing rules in action.